a new episode of the Empowered Badass. I'm Ophélie, your coach who specializes in contortion, flexibility, mobility, and obviously aerial. It's been a while since I last did a podcast. Everything has been quite busy. I teach classes around gyms and studios in London. I do one-on-one personal training, mostly training aerial artists, athletes, and people who are rehabilitating. That's kept me busy. For those who have been following me on Instagram, you know I graduated in business and marketing here, which led to opening my own marketing agency and a subsequent amount of work. I should have been better at making content for you, but I did focus on my marketing clients. But here I am. We can catch up in another episode on what's been going on. But today, I want to start telling you the new format as well. We are going to do in seasons. So we're going to start taking the podcast and the blogging, everything that's content in season, meaning that I am going to provide you with around 12 weeks of seasonal content. And then I'm going to take a break to work on making a next batch of content. And then we're going to work on releasing another season. What I need you to do is engage with the content as much as possible, sharing it and commenting on it as much as you can, because it really helps get more eyeballs and ears to listen to this podcast, to pay attention to this blog, and just make sure that the information gets passed on, because what I do is quite a passion. I do love teaching people, and I really enjoy when everyone keep on sharing the content. What are we going to talk about today? Today, we're going to talk about science. We're going to talk about flexibility and mobility. So I'm going to start really digging a little bit into the science of things for you as aerialist, but also we do need to work on our flexibility when we do aerial, whether you do pole, whether you do silks, whether you do any form of aerial, flexibility is quite important. Personally, I have had a very on and off journey with my flexibility. I've been doing circus and gymnastics for well over 30 years. I started circus at 7, 8 years old, and I was doing gymnastics about 2 or 3 years prior to that. Flexibility has always been important. As a child, I was pretty flexible. I could prop my feet on my head. As I started growing up and had surgeries and long recoveries, flexibility has been more of an issue because I suffer with joint hypermobility. So I have hypermobility in certain parts of my body, in particular in ankles and knees and cervicals. Unfortunately, I've not been very good at practicing my flexibility while I'm rehabbing from injuries and surgeries. I have had a love-hate relationship with flexibility training. When I became a coach, I wanted to learn more about it, not just become more flexible myself, but to teach people how to sustainably work on their flexibility without injuring themselves. Because when we work on flexibility, we have a lot of science behind it. When I was part of a circus, we worked with contortion training. So the trainers were ex-contortionists and were teaching us the ins and outs of contortion from a young age. In gym, the way they trained flexibility was very conservative and old-fashioned. But when I moved on to circus training, flexibility was different. Then when I started taking dance classes and doing performance arts qualifications, I worked a different way because dance stretching is also different. There are various ways to work with flexibility. As an aerialist, it's not always the contortionist option that is best. Unless you are already extremely flexible, doing tricks on the hoop or trapeze always looks very impressive to have a contortionist. However, when you're a normal person, and I don't mean that more where you start from a different point, whether you start with a flexibility advantage or if flexibility comes easily to you, contortionist approach might be best because you still need to build strength for your flexibility. Most of us will need to approach flexibility from a more functional standpoint. This is what we're going to be discussing a little bit more in depth. I have got my note. There is the science of flexibility, which is important to understand when we work. We have first the muscle elasticity. Muscle have the ability to stretch and return to their original length. That's called elasticity. The elasticity obviously is vital for flexibility, and it allows the elongation of the muscle, dynamic and safe stretching, and promoting blood flow and nutrient delivery to the muscle. So the elasticity is actually also helping feed your muscle with the nutrients, making sure that you also keep on stretching because that promotes blood flow, nutrient delivery, and it helps maintaining the pliability. The joint mobility is the range of motion available at the joint. For example, the shoulder and the hip joint are what we call a ball and socket joint. If you take the shoulder, you have some limitation because of you can't kind of like lift into the clavicle bone. But generally, the ball and socket mean that the joints move more freely. The muscles are there to make sure that those joints do not go all right. Some joints like the hips and shoulders have more mobility than hinge joints such as your knee and your ankles. Hinge joints are a bit more limited. They rely on the pliability and joint motion of a ball and socket joint. Joints are very complex. You have the bones, cartilage, ligaments, tendons, and muscles. The complexity of a joint is fascinating. When you look at anatomy images, you see the bone and ligaments as white and as red. When observed under a microscope, the fascinating thing is how smooth the transition is from tissue into muscle and blood flow. There are no clear barriers in how it moves from tissue or bone into muscle, and that's one of the parts that you need to understand is the complexity that it takes to create this joint capsule. The joint capsule is important in maintaining health because if you press too much on the cartilage, especially in the knee, anything that gets too strong on the joint can really damage it long term. When we work flexibility, we want to make sure that we keep healthy ligaments, tendons, and work mostly on muscle pliability and strength. You have to be careful when doing flexibility, especially with people with hypermobility. So remember that this podcast, this vlog, anything is me as a coach with over 30 years of experience. I'm not a doctor, not an MD, not a physio, just sharing 30 years of experience, knowledge, and certifications. Every individual is different. So be mindful to get advice from your own coach. You can get advice from me, but make sure that any limitations or contraindications your doctor has made you aware of. Okay. Always take everything with a grain of salt. The joint is so important. If your knee really heaves under when you're extending your leg and you have a hypermobile knee, I would suggest that you pay attention to that and strengthen the muscles rather than push into your ligament. So recipe for disaster. You can see contortionists with hyperextended legs and elbows, and that is fine. These are years of adaptation from a contortionist body, and they have worked in a way that the ligaments can take the load. Quite often, I know quite a few people who have needed ligament or meniscus reconstruction surgery from the overloading of the job. But that's a job that they do, all right? So it's normal for them to have wear and tear in these areas. But we, as regular people and regular aerialists, should aim to stay sustainable in our practice. So be aware when you work on the hyperextension of your body. It doesn't mean you shouldn't work a bit of hyperextension. It's healthy to get more strength in the ligaments and tendons. But always be aware of how far you go and at what stage you are in your flexibility practice, okay? Always keep healthy joints. And obviously, coming into the joints where we've been talking about the joint capsules, you got the cartilage in the joint. The connective tissue is also part of that sort of joint capsule. You've got the tendon, the ligament, the fascia. The fascia is this big sheet that connects all the muscles together in your body, meaning that even your muscles of the feet are connected to the muscles of your neck. It would look a bit like a cow skin. I know it's not the best analogy, but everything is interconnected. Imagine the fascia as being that sort of white filament that you see in meat when you cut a chicken, like a chicken breast or a drumstick. You can see this white filament, that's connective tissue that keeps everything together. So the IT band is connective tissue. If you come across IT band issues, those are related to connective tissue. They are not muscle, the connective tissue between muscles of your hip and your leg. If you have issues in that band area, you have to work on which muscle is dysfunctional and try to repair that instead. The flexibility of this tissue will affect overall flexibility. That's what I was discussing with your hyperextension of your leg, for example. For that, it's very important to keep hydrated because when you are dehydrated, you will lose some of your flexibility. And also try facial release. The science behind myofascial release is still out, whereas there is really a use for myofascial release. Personally, I think it does. There is the temporary relief or the myofascial release that is quite important before the flexibility practice. The pressure, like a massage before a flexibility practice, optimize the use of your muscle because the fascia is very connected to your nervous system. So you have the central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, and then your peripheral nervous system, which is located in your muscle, your joint, and the rest. The nervous system plays a very important part in your flexibility as well. If you are stressed, really anxious, or having issues in life, not sleeping well or not eating well, this will affect your flexibility greatly. If you have been active and do a lot of CrossFit, running, or other activities that keep your nervous system switched on all the time and you don't teach your body to relax with things like yoga, Pilates, or yin yoga and working on your breath, you are going to struggle progressing in your flexibility compared to those who practice yoga or Pilates. The nervous system is also crucial. From my personal standpoint, I used to be more flexible pre-pandemic than I am now. And I've noticed that COVID did affect me in a certain way. My nervous system has been responding. I invite you to bring that kind of awareness when you practice your flexibility. The progress will not always feel linear. Stay aware of that. Something you need to understand in terms of a muscle response when you practice flexibility is the difference between the spindles and GTO. GTO stands for Golgi tendon organ. It's located near the tendon. And the muscle spindles look a bit like the slinky that we used to roll down the stairs, those weird spirally things. So the spindles are wrapped, spiral around your muscle. They respond to how your muscle is tensing and relaxing. And the Golgi tendon organ manages the force you're applying in your movement. So if we didn't have the Golgi tendon organ and this bottle was full, I would be lifting it. But if that bottle was empty, I would use the same force to lift it off the table. This is what your Golgi tendon organ does. How do we apply that in flexibility? That means that when we work flexibility from the GTO standpoint, we want to create a stimulus that sometimes will come from a prop, but sometimes can also come from within your head. Creating this sort of tension, for example, you're going to squeeze the hands pulling away from each other when we do back bend, or with the legs pulling towards each other when we do some flexibility training for splits. So creating this sort of traction, pull away traction, and also adding props in the process to hold ourselves onto and do this small contraction and release, small contraction and release, small contraction and release in the end range. When you practice flexibility, you add something at the end range that can create a bit more challenge and tune into your GTO a little bit more. Now, from the spindle standpoint, we do have something a little bit different. First, we got what we call the stretch reflex. The stretch reflex is something where your spindles are going to respond to after about a minute or a minute and a half of stretching. If you start doing static stretching, that's your stretch reflex. You're going to lie down, pull your leg towards you, and start holding it. The stretch reflex will start kicking in. The stretch reflex is around 90 seconds to 120 seconds, so a minute and a half to 2 minutes. When you apply sufficient tension, not contraction, to your muscle after that time, it will automatically relax. The nervous system will start to let go. That's the stretch reflex. When you hold a static pose for a substantial amount of time, your body will automatically start relaxing. This is why in contortion, we take stretches that are longer than a minute to kick into the stretch reflex. What's good with it is that you will achieve a progression in your stretch quite nicely. What's not so good with it is that if you don't practice it safely, ensuring that you build the strength beforehand, you might get injured. The reason is that once your muscle gives up or gives in to the stretch, how sure are you that you can actually go further? When you train flexibility, working on the stretch reflex should only happen towards the end of your practice. The way I break down my contortion classes is specifically made so that you don't get injured and follow the protocol that prepares your joints for the stretches and conditions your muscles. So this is how we work basically. We're going to start with a gentle warm up. We're going to lubricate the joint with a synovial fluid. We're going to move around a little bit. The second part of my flexibility practice or a contortion class that I teach will include a bit more challenging mobility exercises, including a little bit of conditioning, meaning we're going to start getting a little bit deeper in our range and we're going to start including some little contraction in the end range. So this is going to start kicking into your Golgi tendon organ and your muscle spindle. After the third part of my class, we're going to do what's called the end range conditioning part, where we're going to start using props. We're going to start pushing a little bit more into the stretches, and we're going to create tension at the range. So this will allow for your body to build the strength, like we were saying, between the spindle and your GTO, and a bit more of that force to hold the stretch in a strength ways. The active stretching, the dynamic part will be happening a bit more at the beginning, and then the active stretching where we start pushing a bit further and tensing at the end range is to make sure that we reach a little bit further but still build strength there. That's the important part. When you start lifting, for example, like a squat or deadlift, you wouldn't lift 100 kilo from the get-go. You wouldn't do an ass to grass with 100 kilo bar. First, you get your entire body weight into doing a proper deep squat, and then you start building. Sometimes when you lift heavy, you're going to stop your squat just a little bit on the knees, and you're going to slowly build the range. And you're obviously going to start taking the weight a little bit further, right? That makes sense. With flexibility, we do the same approach. You wouldn't go past your stretch reflex with an oversplit from the get-go. We're going to start taking it a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And then at the end, we might be trying to do an oversplit. What I do like with oversplits is that it creates that bigger space between you and the floor, and your brain is going to start seeing it as an opportunity to go a little bit deeper, especially when you start passing by that stretch reflex. So those are the small parts in the class that we do. Generally, I would suggest when you go to a contortion class, it should last an hour, but because I teach are generally 45 minutes. I'll do about 5 minutes of warm up and about 10-15 minutes of mobility conditioning, a bit more dynamic, and I'll do 10-15 minutes of end range conditioning. We finish with about 10 minutes of static and more extensive pushing stretches. This ensures minimal risk of injury and really build strength before you start pushing into flexibility. I still do heavily recommend that you give a try to things like yin yoga and yoga in general. And you do want to stay mindful of how you move into your body as well. With yin yoga, it's really nice from a nervous system standpoint. We do want to train the body to not only activate but also find a way to relax. The trick of contortion, which always feels like a mystery to me, is having the body tends to hold you in place and have the strength so your body is switched on to hold you in a deep stretch without hurting itself, while your mind and brain are completely relaxed. And this is the trick, is to find this balance between feeling relaxed and letting yourself relax while your body is able to hold itself into a deeper stretch. So patience here is of the essence. It's important to stay patient. In our daily lives, it's hard to spend 45 minutes to an hour every day. What I recommend to the people that come to my contortion classes is generally when I teach contortion, I teach the same body parts. If I do scissor splits for 4 weeks, I want people to see themselves progressing and I want to make sure they have the opportunity to learn. So I always say pick and mix. Everything is broken into 10-15 minute segments. Pick and mix some segments that they really enjoyed or found useful and apply it into their routines. For example, if you're doing a lower body workout and we've been working on the flexibility of the splits, take the mobility exercises and the dynamic exercises before you work out and spend a bit of time doing 1 or 2 exercises of the end range conditioning and the static stretches. If you implement the pick and mix habit, stacking it up on an already existing routine and do this once or twice a week, that will add up very quickly, 4 to 8 times per month. And that's when you start seeing the results. It's not just going to one class that gets the most results. Implementing the small elements the rest of the week is where you win. So that's how I generally recommend to stretch. When you're quite busy, focus on one aspect at a time and then move on. If you really want to get into everything, by all means, be my guest. When I do aerial classes, for example, maybe this is the time you can actually spend on your upper body flexibility. It's up to you to find a way to make it work into your daily life. What I would say, if I have any other pieces of advice, is obviously know when you're going a bit too far, stay aware of your overtraining. Some people have been asking me, how do I do between my strength training and staying flexible? Strength training is actually quite helpful with flexibility, because if you find a good depth of squat and are able to lift heavier and heavier, you are subsequently going to be able to take a stretch further and further, because you are also holding a load at it and range, which is similar to doing contortion. Sometimes your nervous system might feel overstimulation and soreness. If you're building strength using progressive overload, you're going to struggle with soreness. If that's the case, but you don't want to lose your gains, keep doing the small bits and pieces, except that you won't necessarily see flexibility progress during your strength or progressive overloading phase. And then focus maybe on a deload that will last longer than a week. I deload for longer than a week. So I deload between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on my mood. When you deload, you take away a bit of the weight and you work lighter. This is your opportunity to start focusing a bit more on a flexibility aspect. So deloading, even in aerial, if you take a break and you start lifting, go to fewer classes and switch to yoga and Pilates for a week or two, maybe go from 3 aerial classes to 1, switch from a hardcore aerial class to an aerial yoga class, and find a way to practice your flexibility. That's when you will actually see progress. This is the moment where your body relaxes and you can focus more on relaxing, getting into your static stretches, and the brain will follow that path. For me, has always been the winning recipe, because especially when I first started being a coach about 10 years ago, I was obsessed with lifting, but I wanted to stay flexible. This was the pathway I used to keep lifting, staying strong, and at the same time staying flexible. I will write a blog with all the things I said in this podcast, with references to books and articles to help you understand these concepts more. Remember, I've done several qualifications to become a coach in flexibility, so always take your time. In one of the qualifications that I did, called functional range conditioning, we did end range exercises, which I've applied in a more contortion and flexibility style. The functional range one is more for a different type of athlete and functional training, like lifting. But in flexibility and contortion training, we still apply range conditioning and end range work. This was how the nervous system and your breath are important. Remember that if you are holding a stretch and you can't breathe nice and easy through the nose and feel relaxed, you should take your stretch a little bit less and make sure that you find a comfortable way to static stretch. The diaphragm is quite important, especially in your back bend. You don't want to overly expand your diaphragm, because you can pull one of your intercostal muscles and that gets really painful. Trust me, you don't want that to happen. Avoid hamstring injuries, hip flexor injuries, abductor injuries. Any muscle injuries are excessively painful. It's important to stay sustainable in our approach Breathing is another thing to note. When your body starts shaking, your nervous system feels a bit overloaded. So when you use a strap to stretch into a split and you start feeling the shaking, if you're in a conditioning motion, if you're doing a dynamic or and range conditioning, that's not so bad because that means your nervous system is on. But when you do a static stretch, if you are shaking, you should probably just take your stretch a little bit back in a way that you can relax, because when you're shaking, it's not very relaxing. I think that's it for this episode. Those are really my biggest golden nuggets that I can give as a flexibility coach. Approaching this from science and applied functional approach, I think this is the best advice you can get. I will always promote my videos on my YouTube channels. There are some simple mobility flows, which are really nice to do when you want to wake up, prepare for a workout or after workout. There's flexibility flows, contortion flows that are a bit more challenging, and tutorials where I teach activation exercises and stretches. There are beginners, intermediate, and advanced tutorials on how to perform the moves to maximize your mobility and flexibility. And they are all accessible for free on my YouTube. I also have a platform called the Aerial Performance Lab. In the Aerial Performance Lab, there are various programs that I keep adding every month. There are flexibility programs, mobility and rehab, gym workouts, and conditioning workouts for aerialists. It's for all levels. You need to go into my show notes to find the links to all my products. If you want to join, it's a membership system and you'll be part of a nice community. You can do any program you want and progress yourself as well. So there are some beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And I keep adding content every month. Go and have a look at the show notes where you find access to the blog and my YouTube channel and the EPL, the Aerial Performance Lab. Thank you for joining me. Please share this podcast blog far and wide, because I am sure many of you love to learn about flexibility, especially in the aerial world. And I know that many of your friends would benefit from learning today. Thank you for connecting with me. Please do tag me if you share this on your stories, on your Instagram, on your TikTok, anywhere. I love having your feedback and knowing that you listen, because I'm just talking to a camera here, but I never really know who actually listens, who watches me. It's always nice when I receive a little comment, a little tag, and I know that you actually watch this or listen to this. I will speak to you in the next episode, and I'm really excited for the next one too. See you soon. Bye.